There's not a terrible lot going on today. I'm lucky that I don't have any client appointments today. Don't really have any meetings today. I just have a couple of errands to run and a crap load of work to get done. So hopefully it's gonna be a productive day. When you hear that something is your fault, when somebody comes to you and says, this went wrong, this isn't the way it's supposed to be, life isn't the way it's supposed to be, the business isn't the way it's supposed to be, the transaction with the customer isn't the way it's supposed to be, the product's not the way it's supposed to be, the service is screwed up, and it's your fault. It's your fault. Those three words, four, I guess if you take away the contraction, those are the most empowering words you will ever hear. That is great, great news. See, when you hear it's your fault, the one thing that you can be sure of is that things aren't working out the way they're supposed to. You know that something needs to change. Those three words, it's your fault, if they mean nothing else, they mean something needs to change. And you can only change the things that you can control. So when you hear it's your fault, that's really good news because you can change that. This means that this is a problem that is imminently fixable. There's no excuses. Like, you can do this. And 99% of the time, it is your fault. You're gonna have to get over that. I'm gonna talk about that in a second. But most of the time, when you hear it's your fault, it really is your fault. 1% of the time, it might not be your fault, but it's still your fault. Here's what I mean. I'll give you a few examples of cases where it's not your fault, but it is. Let's say you get a complaint from a customer, and let's say that you've done everything the way you're supposed to, and the customer is still unhappy. A lot of times, the reason the customer is unhappy is because they got surprised. Something, even though things went the way they're supposed to, they didn't know that that's the way they were supposed to go. And it just comes down to a lack of communication. I see that a ton. I see it in my business. I see it in my client's business. The other thing is that if you did everything right and the customer still, and you communicated and you did, and it's not your fault. It is your fault because you let that person through the door. You didn't do your homework to find out that this was a crazy person. And now they're affecting all of the other customers and making problems for them. So it is your fault. Let's say you're the boss. It's not a customer, it's one of your employees. And the employee is blaming you, or they're blaming the company you created for something that was clearly their responsibility. It's not your fault. But it is your fault because you have not created a culture where people can admit their mistakes. You haven't created enough trust where people are comfortable going, you know what, I screwed that up, I can do it better. And that's on you as the business owner. And the same thing is true that was true of customers. If this keeps happening again and again and again, you let the wrong person through the door. And that is something that you have to own. Maybe you don't own the business. Maybe you're working for somebody and they're trying to pin something that was clearly their issue on you. Maybe your boss is coming down on you for something that it wasn't even your responsibility. It's still your fault because you've allowed yourself to be the scapegoat one too many times, and you've let people walk all over you, including your boss. So you have to own that if it's ever going to change, and that's the whole point to this. Whether it's your fault or not is really immaterial. The only thing that matters is that there's something about the situation that needs to change. And there's a litmus test for understanding how well you're going to be able to cope with that change. It all has to do with the first reaction you have when you hear those words, it's all your fault. If that first reaction is reflexive and your thought is, it can't be my fault, there's no way it can be, that would mean that I'm a terrible person, that would mean that I'm a screw up, that would mean that I'm not good at my job, then you got some work to do. Because you're never going to be able to change the situation until you realize that it is your fault. Even if it's not your fault, the only way you're going to be able to make a change is if you're in control of the situation. And when somebody says it's your fault, they're giving you control. They're giving you the ability to make the change. It's much better to have a reflective first reaction where you go, okay, maybe it's my fault, maybe it's not. But how are we going to address this? How are we going to change the situation? Even if it's not my fault, I'm going to make it my fault so that I can make the change. If you're a business owner and you have that kind of attitude, there's almost nothing you can't do. But if you're a business owner and nothing can ever be your fault, you're going to be a struggling business owner for a really long time. And that goes for every area of your life. You're going to be a struggling employee, you're going to be a struggling manager, you're going to be a struggling little league coach. You're gonna, you know, if nothing's ever your fault, then you have no ability to change anything. It has nothing to do with our self-worth, has nothing to do with our values as a human being. Actually, I think it does. I think the people who will take the blame so that they can make the change are ultimately the leaders that we look up to. They're the ones that we write books about. So when somebody says it's all your fault, embrace it, own it, welcome it. Those are some of the sweetest words you'll ever hear. I'll see you guys tomorrow.